So, I am responding to Alyssa's speech. She claimed that bicycling as a mode of commuting has many health and environmental benefits, and her secondary claims were that biking has many health benefits, biking is customizable to the user, and biking saves economically and environmentally. Now, with my responses, you're going to see a very common theme in that these are not really disputed at all, and I'm arguing that by focusing on what is not in dispute at all, she both ignores substantial exceptions to the rule and completely avoids talking about an issue that is potentially more in dispute. So to respond to her first claim, so biking has many health benefits. Well, I mean, exercise has health benefits, of course. Like this is not something that people are arguing against. And a significant exception that she ignores by focusing on something that is not in dispute is osteoporosis. According to the National Osteoporosis Foundation, 20% of seniors who break a hip die within a year, either from complications related to the broken bone or from the surgery to repair it. So, in the event of falling off a bicycle, you might, this is the last thing that they want to be doing. And to respond to claim 2, she was basically arguing about how, with claim 2, she was arguing about how you could adjust the intensity, which, I mean, yeah, you don't have to give it 110%. Like, it's not a hard and fast rule, that's just something coaches say. And this also ignores a pretty big exception to the rule, namely asthma. The American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology finds that people with asthma, especially a variety that's triggered by exercise, are especially triggered when exercising when it's cold and dry. So, if you're commuting to work and it's cold and dry, not a good idea. And finally, to respond to her claim that it saves economically and environmentally, well, I mean, yeah, of course it does. It's cheaper than a car. You spend maybe a couple $100 and that's it. And maybe maintenance, but of course maintenance is going to be cheaper than maintenance for a car. And environmental benefits, this isn't really disputed because, bicycles aren't putting out carbon emissions. No one is arguing that there aren't environmental benefits. And so overall, the fact that none of her claims were in dispute made it sound more like an informative speech than an argumentative one. And by focusing almost exclusively on things that aren't disputed, she ignored a resource that's potentially more contentious: time. So in her final secondary claim, she brought up that about half of all Americans live within 5 miles of work, but let's say you're averaging 10 miles an hour. That's 30 minutes each way. So, maybe there's a side of the argument that would see it as being 1 hour of exercise just in your commute to and from work. But there's also people who would see, well, I have to get up earlier and leave earlier. And it basically, because driving, that's 5 miles isn't going to take long at all. If you average 25 miles per hour, it's 12 minutes. But basically, if she could have argued that the health benefits and economic benefits of cycling outweigh the time expenditures, and that would have been more of an argumentative type of speech. Yeah, overall the speech sounded very informative. And like, it's just, you can't really, like, by making it sound very informative, it's not argumentative and just ignores substantial exceptions to the rule and ignores the resource of time. Thank you.
All right, I thought you took a reasonable approach to this issue by suggesting that there isn't really a conflict on it. It's not an argument, it's an informative presentation. There might be a couple of things where there is dispute, but she's largely ignored them and overlooked those key issues. On the first point, I think you're right. Nobody's going to argue that biking isn't exercise and that exercise is generally good for people, but there are exceptions. And the exception you point out is osteoporosis, but I think there probably, you mentioned accidents at one point. I think that would be something else to point out, that, you know, your chances of being hurt on a bicycle are substantially higher in a variety of ways. I don't, you know, and of course, depending on the age, it could, the severity of the accident could be stronger. I think you want to point out that the advocate didn't provide any competing information on that particular point, and you have provided some information that suggests that the risk is relatively high there. The same thing on the second point. You go with the asthma argument, and that's perfectly fine. I understand the underlying premise here is, again, that there's not really any dispute on that issue. Now, the economic and environmental issues that you're talking about, you know, I think that you kind of concede a lot of stuff here. I'm not exactly sure that you need to do that. I think there are probably ways to diminish the environmental effects of driving, for instance, or other forms of transportation, public transportation. And in fact, if there's any effort made to create or provide bike paths or any of those sorts of things, there would be environmental cost to that, and that might be a way to respond to that issue. But you're back on the same kind of general issue. There's no doubt that a bicycle is less polluting than a car. So what's the argument here? You know, what position is somebody supposed to take on that particular point? I did think that you offered an explanation at the end that says, look, the location of the controversy on this is whether or not the trade-offs are worth the sacrifices that you have to make, and there are significant sacrifices that you have to make in doing this. You only give us a hypothetical example on those sacrifices, and I think you limit it to just the time issue. I think there are other issues that are involved as well. For example, other resources that you'd have to be providing to people who were commuting on a regular basis by bicycle. I would certainly hope that they would provide shower facilities at the businesses that I worked at, you know, because when I got there and after riding my bike for an hour to work, I don't think anybody else would want to work with me, you know, because I'd smell pretty damn bad, you know. So there are those kinds of complications that come up. So I think you're right in pointing out that that's where the conflict is. It's not really on the issues that are brought up there, and you did a good job presenting and explaining that. All right.